The following is a fan-based video review under fair use. King Kong vs. Godzilla is owned by Toho Studios, Universal Pictures, the Criterion Collection, the Tomoyuki Tanaka Estate, and the Yashiro Honda Estate. Please support the official release. Hey guys, what's up? It's BigJackFilms here, and welcome back to the King Kong review series. Well guys, it looks like I'm in a bit of a pickle, because today I have to make issue on this editorial with a few things I missed in my review of the iconic Toho monster mash simply known as King Kong vs. Godzilla. Being the fourth episode of my show back in 2013, God, I'm fucking old, my original review of the Kaiju classic has come under some heavy criticisms for not being as informative as most expected, especially in this day and age of detailed reviews. Well, bear in mind that at the time, the show wasn't fully developed yet, and we were still trying to find our feet with the channel. Not to mention that the King Kong reviews was actually influenced, if not a response to, Cinemassacre's Monster Madness Godzilla-thon from 2008. Hell, years later, James Rolfe himself commented that my King Kong reviews actually was the source of reference for doing his 2017 Kongathon. Take that, critics who think my show isn't informative enough! How dare you have an opinion of an opinion! But to be fair, at the time, these episodes were coming out very quickly, and therefore, some of the information was rushed, and in my opinion, can be a quick and occasionally rational opinion. Back on that episode, I stated that I wasn't really a big fan of the Toho SHOWA Kong films, given they were mostly really campy, and Kong himself in terms of the suits looked fucking awful. However, my opinions on the films have slightly changed over time, given I can see them in a much more inspired light than I previously thought. I will say for sure that King Kong vs. Godzilla was, to be fair, one of my first experiences with the King of the Monsters. I remember renting this occasionally along with Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla and Godzilla 1985 from my local video stores and having fun with them on VHS, as well as when they aired on television. And yeah, despite the goofy 60s Batman-esque camp of the film, I still think there's great entertainment in these films. Especially King Kong vs. Godzilla. It's so goofy, it's good. But I think that's the problem some people had with my original review. Which version did I look at more? Some people cited my review as unfair, as I was only talking about the American cut of the film, rather than the original Japanese cut, which is cited by particularly every Godzilla fan as the superior version. The only problem was that for a while, the original Japanese version for me was hard to find since it was never released in North America at the time. But to be fair, there are a lot of issues in my review that have come by as of late that I now feel, with the upcoming release of Godzilla vs. Kong in November, that it's time to revisit this legendary Kaiju brawl and discuss in more light what people have stated with my review. With that said, let's see what's new to discuss in my reissue of King Kong vs. Godzilla. Now, while I have discussed the origins of this film in the original video and in my King Kong vs. Frankenstein episode, I recently rewatched them along with the original Japanese cut of the movie in preparation to make this reissue, and honestly, I am absolutely embarrassed about how much I got wrong about the behind-the-scenes information, and I feel like I need to go over it again in order to clear up a few things. First off, I stated that during Willis O'Brien's attempt to make a King Kong vs. Frankenstein film, Toho was considering the same with the monster of Germany battling the monster of Japan. This is not true. Now, with faster knowledge on the internet, more information has come forward. Anyway, Toho's actual first attempt at a movie featuring Frankenstein was called Frankenstein vs. the Human Vapor, a follow-up to Toho's earlier film of the same name from 1960, where a scientific experiment leaves an ex-con named Mizuno with the ability to transform himself into a gaseous substance. In this story, Mizuno is searching for a scientist named Gildor, who more or less sounds like an elf from Lord of the Rings, who had recently stolen the body of the Frankenstein monster from Baron von Frankenstein's graveyard in Germany, with the intention of reviving it, vindicating Frankenstein's work, while Mizuno hopes that the doctor might be able to resurrect his long-lost love, Fujichiyo, who perished in an explosion at the end of the previous film. The story treatment submitted by Shinichi Sekizawa was incomplete, and lacking inspiration to finish it, he abandoned the idea. However, influenced by the concept of a giant Frankenstein monster from the King Kong vs. Frankenstein / King Kong vs. Prometheus story producer John Beck had showed them after going behind O'Brien's back,
you dumbbell!
that Toho planned on making Frankenstein vs. Godzilla as a follow-up to King Kong vs. Godzilla. Oh, by the way, that's something else I got wrong in my original video, where I said Toho personally went to RKO and proposed the idea for the movie, when in actually it was after John Beck made the pitch to Toho, and that they went to RKO to gain the rights to King Kong to be used in the film. Of course, as we all know, even Frankenstein vs. Godzilla would be scrapped, and was instead replaced with Mothra vs. Godzilla. While the plot would eventually be recycled and released as Frankenstein vs. Baragon, aka Frankenstein Conquers the World, which would then get a sequel, Frankenstein's Monster Sanda vs. Gyra, aka War of the Gargantuas.
No more!
You know what, I better stop here before this video turns into the history of unmade Frankenstein movies, huh? Anyway, back to King Kong vs. Godzilla. During its production, director Ishiro Honda wanted the theme of the movie to be a satire about the rise of the television industry and how corporate entities jumped at the opportunities through exploitation and outrageous programming. Stated, people were making a big deal out of the ratings, but my own view of TV shows was that they did not take the viewer seriously, that they took the audience for granted. So I decided to show that through my movie. Funny how that's kind of relevant today more than ever. But despite the film being a parody of its own genre, it also manages, unintentionally or not, to capture the continuing tensions between Japan and the United States, with the two monsters battling it out. Godzilla, in some instances, now seems more as a metaphor of Japan taking its aggression out on the US, with Kong being more of the peacemaker who doesn't want to fight, yet will defend himself if necessary. But this is just my own personal theory. As for the film's more campier moments, Ichi Tsuburaya, the head of the special effects department at Toho, wanted to board in the audience of the kaiju genre to appeal to children's sensibilities. Toho liked this approach, and so the film was given a much lighter tone than the previous two Godzilla films and contains a great deal of humor within the action sequences, such as Godzilla and Kong volleying a giant boulder back and forth. However, Honda was not a fan of the dumbing down of the monsters and stated in an interview years later, "I don't think a monster should ever be a comical character. The public is more entertained when the great King Kong strikes fear into the hearts of the little characters."
I want my own monster. Find me a monster, fast.
As for the special effects, Tsuburaya really had a lot to work with this time around, and improved Godzilla's physique and effects work, given post-raids again, had quite the resume of kaiju flicks with Rodan, Varan, and the Mysterians, to name a few. So the concept of bringing the two monsters together in color and widescreen seemed like a dream come true. Now, while I did state that the Kong suit looks awful in my original review, the Godzilla suit, known by fans as the King Goji suit, I gotta admit, looks amazing for 1962. Its size, its speed, and the actor inside, once again portrayed by the legendary Hiro Nakajima, are a vast improvement from the rushed Raids costume. Not only could Nakajima move faster and have more articulation, but the high-speed camera shots look spectacular. Godzilla's first attack, for example, I'll say, is not only iconic, but terrifying as he swims to the shores of Japan and the military are outmatched to stop him. I also love the improvements of the face and claws, making them much bigger and the head much more dinosaur-like. But I will say that while the face looks good from a sideways glance, it looks awfully silly when viewing it from the front. Not to mention, for some reason, there's this strange clanking sound whenever Godzilla moves his arms up and down. Like, what the hell is he doing? I love you this much! Look! I also gotta give major props to the actor playing King Kong, Shoichi Solomon Hyros, who afterwards would go on to play Godzilla's arch-enemy King Ghidorah in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster and Invasion of the Astro Monster. While the Kong suit looks moldy and unfinished, he does give a good physical performance with what's given to him, and all the physique is pretty damn impressive from his fights with the Big G, including the final fight scene when Kong throws Godzilla over his shoulder. Hyros didn't throw an empty suit, nor a dummy inside the suit, but actually threw it with Hiro Nakajima still inside. God damn, Kong can lift! Gives me more of a reason to put money on him in the rematch this year.
I'll toss you. Heads for King Kong. Tails.
As for the battle with the giant octopus on Faro Island, the majority of the shots with the creature were done with real octopuses at high camera speed. While the one Kong fights physically was a cellophane model, one of the octopuses was returned to the sea, while Tsuburaya took one of them home and had it for dinner after shooting was completed, which what everyone has said is fucking awesome. Did the team at ILM eat the giant octopus from Kong Skull Island? I don't think so! Anyways, back to the Kong suit real quick. While I still think it looks awful, there are a few other things I got wrong about it in my original video. One, the arms look long and skinny because one of the suits was built with arm extensions with fake non-movable hands to try and make it look like a real gorilla. However, this suit was only used in scenes where Kong pounds his chest, when he's running and thrashing his arms over his head, and when he's destroying the electrical towers surrounding Tokyo. While in other scenes such as when he's fighting hand-to-hand with Godzilla, throwing rocks and boulders, and when he picks up the train carrying Fumiko, they used a suit with regular length arms and movable hands, not to mention an impressive full-scale hand on blue screen for the actress, much like the original King Kong. 2, I stated that in some shots, Kong's face looks like a puppet on strings. Well, that's because it is a puppet, a hand puppet, which was only used in close-up shots of Kong's face, like when he's fighting the giant octopus, which was a real octopus for this shot, drinking the red berry juice, or when he's chewing on the electrical wires, complete with stiff, fake-looking arms. It makes him look less like a marionette and more like a rejected Muppet. Give us electricity cookies! Well, aside from the basic history which I discussed, for one thing, this film holds the record as the #1 most successful film in Godzilla's history, making over $3.2 million upon its initial Japanese release, $2.7 million in its American release, not to mention tons more come-home video releases in the 80s and 90s for a new generation. It was released in the late summer of 1962 in Japan and didn't get released in North America until nearly a year later by Universal International, making it the first King Kong film under their name prior to their attempted acquisition in the 1970s. However, upon release in North America, the film was chopped down and new scenes were added with American actors that would convey the impression that the film was actually a newscast. TV actor Michael Keith played newscaster Eric Carter, a United Nations reporter who spends much of his time commenting on the action from the UN headquarters via satellite broadcast, and Harry Holcomb was cast as Dr. Arnold Johnson, the head of the
Museum of Natural History,
who tries to explain Godzilla's origins and his and Kong's motivations. The two come off more like they were a couple of sports commentators watching a wrestling or boxing match, with how they compare the two monsters' stats and chances of who would win.
Godzilla has a brain about this size, while Kong is a thinking animal. Being instinctive rivals, there is no doubt that they will attempt to destroy one another.
I don't care what it is. That guy's ruining a perfectly good game of football.
Guys, this isn't a football match. This is like fucking Beast Wars right now. Have a little bit more common sense.
This is an interesting sight. Yes. Who do you think's gonna win?
The winner isn't what interests me.
How much more preferable it would be if they both lost. Yes.
These additions really dumbed down the movie to an even higher extent that was the norm for Godzilla movies brought to American shores during the Showa era. The studio also obtained stock footage from another Toho science fiction film, The Mysterians, which was used to not only represent the United Nations satellite, but which was also utilized during the film's climax with the earthquake and massive flood. I mean, the satellite is so iconic that we actually have it orbiting space as we speak. Ain't that right, USS Kaiju Guard?
Copy that, Jack. We've gotten things fixed up rather easily since the attack. I guess you could say things are starting to look quite clear up here.
Sean? Where the hell's Nick? He's supposed to be on captain's duty!
Well, it's less of a captain's duty and more of a captain's log at the moment.
I told him not to eat those hot Rodan tacos.
Captain, we've got potential sightings of a Muto on the abandoned Planet X.
Again with the Mutos. I hate Mutos. Keep track of that, Mr. Tang, and don't lose sight of it. Hey, what's the status in the lab?
It's no use, Captain. The captured Biolante cells have eaten the last of its supply. I'm giving you all she's got.
Oh, shit!
Yeah, folks. folks were still trying to repair the damn thing after the Galactic Empire fucked it up. Not to mention the entire score by legendary Japanese film composer Akira Ifukube being essentially non-existent in the American cut and replaced by stock music from Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman and The Creature from the Black Lagoon. According to film editor of the American version, Peter Zinner, he was paid $12,000 for his work on editing the movie and was told from the higher-ups that they didn't like the music and wanted something more westernized. Wow. Well, to quote the classic meme, "That's crazy!" The only traces of the original Ifukube score that remain in the American cut are almost all the scenes on Faro Island, including when we're introduced to the island natives, when Sakura and Furu explore the interiors of the island, and of course when the natives do their ceremonial dance to put Kong to sleep after drinking the berry juice. Speaking of the natives, I stated in the original review that they were Japanese actors painted dark to look African. Honestly, looking back, I don't think that was necessary, given there are many Japanese people with dark skin. Or maybe they were painted dark, but probably to look more like Indonesians rather than African. Whichever the case, I do apologize if my assumptions were a little unfair. It doesn't help that the movie's reputation of being a bad film is mostly due to the American cut being the only version most have seen outside of Japan due to Universal's stranglehold on the rights they have. The only way to see the original Japanese version for years was to buy Japanese imported VHSs and DVDs, but unfortunately the prints were of terrible condition and quality. This is probably why the rumor of the two endings became so widespread after the publishing of the Crestwood books, which was essentially a false accusation from the publishers. But thankfully, in 2019, the rights have softened with the Criterion collection, releasing for the first time in North America the entire Showa era of Godzilla films, including the original Japanese cut of King Kong vs. Godzilla to North American audiences. So yeah, I know I made some mistakes and rushed to a quick assumption in my review, but to be fair, I still have fun with this film, despite the poor qualities of the early 1960s. Overall, while the American cut is more nostalgic, I can't help but come to realization that I like the Japanese version a lot better. While it does sometimes feel slower, it allows more character development, plot building, and time to breathe a little. While the Japanese version was intended to be a satire, it actually feels more epic and serious than its Universal counterpart, which that version feels a lot like a cheap tone to the 60s Batman series. And that's saying something when the 1976 King Kong was written by the writer of the Batman series, Lorenzo Semple Jr. Plus, the prints on the Japanese version feel more cleaned and better taken care of than the American cut, which always had a greasy, dirty quality to it. I also feel the characters and its monsters come off much more different. For one thing, Mr. Tako, while still hilariously played by Japanese comedian Ichiro Arashima, feels a little bit more sinister than the American cut. He feels more like a menacing but cowardly rat, like Alfred in the Hobbit films or Peter Pettigrew in the Harry Potter series. Still, he seemed to have put a lot of energy and effort in creating essentially a live-action cartoon of the Carl Denham role, more so than the Mighty Kong did with Dudley Moore's portrayal.
Ha ha! Ziegfeld, eat your heart out!
Oh, for fuck's sakes! The rest of the cast are about the same. Mostly comedic, but also heroic. Hell, I'm surprised that of all people, Akira Takarado wasn't cast, given his resume in the majority of Godzilla films throughout the Showa era. However, the only cast member to really return was, of course, Hiro Nakajima as Godzilla. And with that said, with both Kong and Godzilla, despite the same scenes, some even being extended in the original cut, the movie portrays them more as animals rather than monsters. Godzilla seems more on par to seeking revenge on humanity for the continuity of being frozen in ice in Godzilla Raids Again, whereas King Kong seems more like a fish out of water when entering Tokyo, and Godzilla being a pure threat of territory for him in his path. And while the special effects are of their time, no disrespect to Eiji Tsuburaya, the biggest difference is in the music, and Akira Ifukube's score is a lot stronger and more epic than the stock Universal music. And it infuriates me that such a magnificent score was stripped for American audiences. But As I said in my original review, the movie's success around the world would come to convince Toho to build a franchise around the character of Godzilla and start producing sequels on a yearly basis, leading to a 65-year-long franchise consisting of 35 films, 32 produced by Toho, 3 Hollywood films, toys, video games, books, comics, and the character's overall status as a worldwide pop culture icon. And to think all of this would have never been possible if it hadn't been for King Kong. So, if I had to revise my rating, I'd still give the American cut of the movie a 6 out of 10, but I would happily give the original unaltered Japanese cut a 7.5 out of 10. While I still rate it lower than most high-class Godzilla films, I still consider it one of my favorites in the Kaiju genre, and one of my favorite Godzilla films of all time. So yeah, apologies if my original review wasn't as informative, but hopefully this makes up for it, and you can see how my opinion on the film has sort of changed. However, if your opinion is different, let me know in the comment section below. And my only hope is that you guys don't want a reissue of King Kong Escapes, because there's only so much of this Toho turd of an ape I can stand. Oh! 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 You really want one, don't you, people? Okay, next time on the King Kong review series, we'll be doing a reissue of King Kong Escapes. Y'all owe me big time! Now that part 1's out of the way, and we wait for part 2, check how Dr. Terawatt's new invention is working out.
Incoming video call from Bradley Dunn at Studio 95.
On screen.
Hey man, what's up?
Oh, not much, Brad. Just, checking in on the new weapon.
Jack, you've been at the damn thing for over a year. Are you sure the doctors didn't give you faulty hardware? He is Toronto's greatest supervillain.
Well, he calls himself a supervillain, but he's more of an anti-hero. Besides, he's been my friend since I was a boy, and without him, the fictional dimensional transporter would have been nothing more than a pipe dream.
Yeah, but it started with the Great War long ago.
A war I thought was finished, but still lingers to return. If that's the case, we better be prepared for anything. And to do that, we're gonna have to play a little game. A game with a hell of a lot more power.